They laughed when I showed up wearing that faded, patched uniform, called me a charity case, a wannabe playing soldier. Lieutenant Thorne slapped it right off my shoulders in front of everyone. But when the Admiral walked in and saw what I was wearing, their smug faces shattered. Some secrets don't stay buried. If you love stories about karma, justice, and silent warriors getting the last word, hit that like button right now and subscribe. This one's going to leave you speechless. I remember walking into that briefing room for the first time like it was yesterday. Naval Special Operations Command, Delta Squad, the most elite unit I'd ever been assigned to. My boots echoed on the polished floor, and I could feel every pair of eyes lock onto me before I even cleared the doorway. But it wasn't my face they were staring at. It was my uniform, faded desert camouflage, worn thin in places, with strange patterns of discoloration that didn't quite match normal combat wear. The patches were gone, just empty Velcro squares where unit designations should have been. There were tears along the shoulder that had been carefully repaired, and if you looked close enough, you could see the fabric was almost stiff in certain spots, like it had been through something chemical, something that changed its very texture. I knew how it looked. I knew exactly what they were thinking. Lieutenant Thorne was the first to speak. He stood at the head of the table, his uniform so crisp it could cut glass, every ribbon perfectly aligned, every crease sharp enough to draw blood. He looked me up and down with this expression I'd seen before, the kind that says you've already been judged and found wanting. "You must be our new addition," he said, and there was something in his voice. Not quite welcoming. Interesting choice of uniform. I kept my face neutral, professional. "Yes, sir. Operator Breyer, reporting as assigned." Warrant Officer Lennox, sitting to Thorne's right, leaned back in his chair with a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was older, weathered, the kind of veteran who'd seen enough public operations to think he'd seen everything. "Vintage military surplus?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Or are we doing Throwback Thursdays now?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. I didn't respond. I'd learned a long time ago that some things don't need defending, even when every instinct screams at you to explain, to justify, to make them understand. Thorne folded his arms, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure me out. "Where did you serve before this assignment, Breyer?" It was the question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The answer I was cleared to give felt like a lie, even though it was technically true. "Classified assignments, sir." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. I watched Thorne's jaw tighten, saw Lennox exchange a glance with the two other operators, Seren and Rowan, who'd been silent up until now. They thought I was being cocky, arrogant, or worse, they thought I was lying, making up some mysterious past to seem more important than I was. "Classified," Thorne repeated slowly, like he was tasting the word and finding it bitter. "Right." That was it. That was the moment the wall went up between us. I could feel it solidifying, brick by brick. They'd already been a unit for 3 years, bonded through deployments I'd never be briefed on, sharing inside jokes I'd never understand. And here I was, the outsider in the mystery uniform, claiming secrets I couldn't prove. I stood there, ramrod straight, and took my seat at the far end of the table. My uniform felt heavier than usual, like it was carrying all the weight of everything I couldn't say. The chemical burns hidden in the fabric pattern, the blast marks disguised as normal wear, the reason every patch had been removed, because the unit designation I'd served under didn't officially exist in any database they'd ever have clearance to access. But I couldn't tell them that. I couldn't tell them anything. So I sat in that room full of sideways glances and barely concealed judgment, and I prepared myself for what I already knew was coming. They were going to make me prove myself, and I had no way to do it without breaking laws that could land me in prison for the rest of my life. It started small. The second day, I was in the locker room changing after morning PT when I heard Seren's voice carry across the metal benches. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. I mean, where do you even get a uniform that beat up? Did she pull it out of a dumpster behind a military surplus store? I kept my eyes down, folding my PT gear with deliberate precision. Rowan laughed. that sharp bark of amusement that's designed to cut. Maybe it's got sentimental value, like her grandpa's or something? They wanted me to react, to defend myself, to explain. But how could I? How could I tell them that the strange discoloration on the left shoulder wasn't dirt or age? It was a chemical burn from a nerve agent that doesn't have a name in any public database. That the tears along the ribcage weren't from snagging on barbed wire during a training exercise, but from shrapnel in a facility that officially doesn't exist. That I kept wearing it because after 8 months of experimental medical treatments for chemical exposure, it was the only uniform that didn't feel like sandpaper against my surgically repaired skin. I couldn't. So I stayed silent, finished changing, walked out with my head high and my secrets locked behind my teeth. By day 5, the mockery had evolved from whispers to performance art. We were running drills in the training yard, full gear, and I was wearing the same uniform because it was the only one I had that I could actually function in. Thorne stopped the entire exercise when he saw me, just held up his hand and everything ground to a halt. "Briar," he called out, loud enough that operators from other units turned to look. "Why do you keep wearing that rag? Are you trying to make some kind of statement? Trying to look like you've seen real action?" I stood at attention, sweat dripping down my spine. "It's regulation, sir. It's my issued uniform." "Issued by who?" Lennox chimed in from behind Thorne, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "The Salvation Army?" The laughter hit me like a physical wave. I watched Rowan pull out his phone, angling it to capture my face, my humiliation, probably already planning to share it in whatever group chat they had that I wasn't part of. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd survived things that would break most people. I could survive their laughter, but surviving and not feeling it are two different things entirely. Day 8 brought a new level of threat. "Equipment inspection," Thorne announced during our evening briefing. "Mandatory, full gear. Tomorrow morning, 0600. And then he looked directly at me, and I saw something almost gleeful in his eyes. "And Briar, if you show up in that embarrassment again, you're doing 200 burpees in front of the entire base. Maybe that'll motivate you to find some actual military standards." I barely slept that night. Lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, running through my options. I had other uniforms, technically. Standard issue that rubbed my scars raw within an hour. That made every movement feel like I was being flayed alive from the inside out. I could wear one, suffer through it, give them what they wanted, or I could show up in the uniform that let me do my job, the one that carried the weight of a mission they'd never understand, and take whatever came next. I chose the latter. The morning of day 9, I walked into that inspection in the same faded desert camo, freshly washed, but unmistakably the same. Thorne's face went from pink to red to something approaching purple. The other squad members formed a semicircle around us, and I could feel their anticipation like electricity in the air. He stepped close enough that I could smell his coffee breath. His fingers grabbed the empty Velcro on my shoulder where the unit patch should have been, and he yanked, hard. The ripping sound echoed in the sudden silence. "What is this?" His voice was low, dangerous. "What unit were you even in?" My security clearance oath rang in my ears. The NDA I'd signed in a hospital room that didn't appear on any official map, the federal prison time that came with violation. "I can't answer that, sir." The slap wasn't hard enough to hurt, but that wasn't the point. His palm connected with the fabric over my shoulder, the sound sharp and degrading. "You're a disgrace. Get out of my sight." Lennox's voice followed me as I turned to leave. Maybe she bought it off someone who actually served. I walked back to my quarters with my spine straight and my eyes dry, even though everything inside me was screaming. They'd humiliated me, documented me for failure to maintain standards, and I couldn't say a single word in my own defense. The summons came the next morning. A curt message on my datapad, "Report to Admiral Vesper's office, 0900. No explanation, no context, just those words that might as well have been a death sentence. I was being discharged. I was sure of it. Thorne had filed his complaint, documented my supposed failure to maintain standards, and now I was going to be removed from the unit I'd barely had a chance to prove myself in. My stomach twisted as I walked through the corridors of the command building, and I had to focus on putting one foot in front of the other because my legs felt like they were made of water. I passed Delta Squad in the hallway. They were clustered near the vending machines, and I watched their expressions shift when they saw me. Lennox whispered something that made Rowan snicker. Seren just stared with this mixture of pity and satisfaction, like she was watching someone walk to their own execution and feeling good about it. Thorne wasn't with them, but I could feel his presence in their smug certainty. They thought they'd won. The Admiral's office door was heavier than I remembered. I knocked twice, heard the crisp "enter," and stepped inside, expecting to face my fate alone. But I wasn't alone. Admiral Vesper sat behind her desk, her expression carved from granite, and standing beside her were 3 men in civilian clothes. My heart stopped. I knew those faces. I'd bled beside them in a place that didn't exist, during a mission that never happened. "Operator Breyer," Admiral Vesper's voice cut through my shock like a blade. "Is it true you've been wearing your field uniform from Operation Phantom Gate?" My throat went dry. I hadn't heard that name spoken out loud in over a year. "Yes, ma'am." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "It's the only combat uniform that actually fits properly after—" I stopped myself, the words classified hanging unspoken between us. "After the spinal surgery," the Admiral finished for me, and her voice carried an edge of barely controlled fury. "After the chemical exposure, after 8 months in a medical facility that doesn't exist on any official record." One of the civilian-clothed men stepped forward. I recognized him, Hansen, the mission coordinator who'd pulled me out of that hell. "We've been monitoring the situation," he said quietly. "When we heard about the complaints filed against you, we had to intervene." Admiral Vesper opened a folder on her desk, and I caught glimpses of my own face in declassified photos, medical reports with entire sections blacked out. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly for the record," she said, and every word was wrapped in ice. "Operation Phantom Gate, extraction mission in a hostile nation. 6 operators, all female, operating in an area where male personnel would compromise the mission. You volunteered." I nodded. I remembered volunteering, remembered thinking it would be 3 weeks, maybe a month. "The chemical weapons facility wasn't supposed to be there," Hansen added, his jaw tight. "Intel failure. When it exploded, Operator Breyer stayed behind to carry out 2 wounded teammates through an active nerve agent cloud." My hands were shaking now. I clasped them behind my back where no one could see. The memories were always there, always waiting. The alarms, the burning in my lungs, the weight of 2 bodies I refused to leave behind, even when my own nervous system was shutting down. "The exposure nearly killed you," Admiral Vesper continued. "The experimental treatment saved your life, but left chemical scarring across 40% of your skin. The uniform you're wearing was specially treated during decontamination. It's the only one that doesn't cause you constant pain." She looked up at me, and I saw something fierce in her eyes. "The patches were removed because the unit designation is classified above top secret. Your medical records show you were on leave during those 8 months because the facility you were treated in doesn't officially exist." She closed the folder with a snap that made me flinch. "And you've been letting Delta Squad mock you for this? Mock this?" Her voice rose, and I'd never heard Admiral Vesper raise her voice before. "You've been enduring humiliation, degradation, physical intimidation, all because you couldn't violate your security clearance? Ma'am, I couldn't explain without—" "I know exactly what you couldn't do, Operator." She stood, and suddenly she seemed 10 feet tall. "But they don't get to humiliate one of my operators and remain ignorant of their own stupidity. Not on my watch." The look in her eyes told me everything was about to change. And Delta Squad had no idea what was coming. The order came down 2 hours later. Base-wide assembly, all special operations personnel, main auditorium, 1400 hours. Attendance mandatory, no exceptions. I'd never seen a base-wide assembly called outside of major security incidents or change of command ceremonies. The auditorium filled with confused operators, everyone whispering, speculating. I watched Delta Squad file in from my position near the side entrance. Thorne walked with his chest out, that confident swagger of someone who thought this might be about a new deployment, maybe a commendation ceremony. Lennox was joking with Rowan about something, both of them relaxed, unbothered. Serene kept checking her phone like this was an inconvenience to her schedule. They had no idea. None of them had any idea. Admiral Vesper appeared and gave me a single nod. Stage operator, full uniform. My legs carried me up those steps while my mind screamed at me to run. Every eye in that auditorium locked onto me as I crossed to center stage, and I heard the murmurs start immediately. I stood at attention in the uniform they'd mocked, the one Thorne had slapped off my shoulder less than 24 hours ago, and I felt more exposed than I had during the actual mission. Admiral Vesper took the podium and the room fell silent. Today we're here to discuss standards, respect, and classification protocols. Her voice carried to every corner of the space. Specifically, what happens when operators forget that silence doesn't mean absence of service. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. I didn't need to turn around to know what was playing. I could hear it. The staccato burst of gunfire, the wail of chemical alarms, radio chatter with voices distorted by gas masks and panic. I closed my eyes and I was back there, my lungs burning, my hands gripping fabric and flesh as I dragged two bodies that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each through smoke that turned everything into shadows and death. The footage was declassified but heavily redacted, faces blurred into pixels, locations scrubbed from every frame. But the action was clear enough. A figure in desert camo, moving through hell, refusing to leave anyone behind. The explosion that lit up the night sky like a second sun. The medevac helicopter, and a body being loaded onto a stretcher, uniform already deteriorating from chemical exposure, barely moving except for the shallow rise and fall of labored breathing. "The operator in that footage?" Admiral Vesper said, and her voice cut through my memories like a lifeline, "is standing on this stage, Operator Breyer." The auditorium erupted, not in applause, in shock. Gasps and sharp inhales and the shuffle of hundreds of people turning to stare at me with new eyes. I kept mine forward, locked on the back wall, because if I looked at Delta Squad, I didn't know what I'd see, and I didn't know if I could handle it. "Some of you," the Admiral continued, and her tone could have frozen fire, "have seen fit to mock her service, her uniform, her silence about matters she is legally prohibited from discussing." She paused. Let that sink in. "Lieutenant Thorne, Warrant Officer Lennox, front and center, now." I heard their footsteps before I saw them. Slow, hesitant. When they finally appeared in my peripheral vision, climbing onto the stage, Thorne's face had gone the color of old paste. Lennox couldn't meet anyone's eyes. They stood at attention, but there was no confidence in it now, just the posture of men who'd realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. "You humiliated an operator," Admiral Vesper said, and every word landed like a gavel, "whose clearance level you will never achieve, whose sacrifice earned medals that will never be public, whose uniform tells a story you don't have the right to hear." She let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. "You are hereby formally reprimanded, removed from Delta Squad leadership effective immediately. You will undergo mandatory retraining on classification protocols, professional conduct, and basic human decency. You're reassigned to separate units pending review of your fitness for special operations." I watched Thorne's jaw work like he wanted to say something, but what could he say? What possible defense existed? "Warrant Officer Rowan," the Admiral's voice cracked like a whip, "I'm told you filmed Operator Breyer's humiliation on your personal device. Surrender it. Now. Unauthorized recording of a classified operator is a security violation. Consider yourself fortunate I'm not bringing formal charges." The auditorium was so quiet, I could hear Rowan's hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. Then Admiral Vesper turned to me. "Operator Breyer, do you have anything to say?" Every person in that room waited. I could feel the weight of their attention, their curiosity, their newly formed respect mixed with guilt for those who'd watched and said nothing. I thought about all the things I could say, about the pain, the isolation, the months of wondering if my body would ever feel normal again, about carrying the weight of secrets that left me defenseless against cruelty. Instead, I kept it simple. "Permission to continue wearing my issued uniform, ma'am." Admiral Vesper smiled, and it was fierce and proud. "Granted, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me personally." 2 weeks later, I walked into the training command office and found an offer waiting on the desk. Lead instructor position for classified operations protocols. They wanted me to teach the next generation of operators about the missions no one talks about, the sacrifices no one sees, the weight of carrying secrets that could crush you if you let them. I said yes before I'd even finished reading the paperwork. They asked me to help select new leadership for Delta Squad 2. Me, the woman they'd tried to break. And I sat in those interviews and I listened to candidates talk about teamwork and respect and integrity, and I chose the ones who understood that strength isn't about what you can prove, it's about what you can carry in silence. Thorne tried to apologize. I saw him waiting outside the training facility one evening, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before, his perfect uniform somehow looking less sharp. He opened his mouth and words tumbled out, about assumptions, about ego, about how he'd let his need to be the most decorated person in the room blind him to basic human decency. I listened. I didn't owe him forgiveness, and I didn't give it. But I acknowledged his words with a nod, because growth deserves recognition even when the damage can't be undone. He'd have to live with what he did. That was consequence enough. The uniform stayed with me. I still wear it when I teach, when I train, when I stand in front of rooms full of operators who look at the faded fabric and the empty patches, and they know. They don't know the details, they never will, but they know that silence means something, that some stories are written in scars you'll never see and missions you'll never hear about. And they respect it. That's the thing about real respect. It doesn't need explanations, it doesn't demand proof. It exists in the space between what's said and what's understood, in the quiet acknowledgement that not everything needs to be shared to be real. I thought I needed them to know my story to see my worth. I thought the humiliation would break me, that the mockery would hollow me out until there was nothing left but shame and silence. But I was wrong. My worth existed before they knew. It existed through their cruelty. It exists now in the way new operators look at me, not because they know what I've done, but because they trust that my silence carries weight they should respect. Watching them learn that lesson, watching their faces change from mockery to shock, to shame to understanding, that was justice I didn't even ask for. Karma delivered by an admiral who refused to let disrespect go unanswered. I stand now with a new team, operators who see this uniform and ask no questions because they understand that some patches are removed for reasons bigger than vanity, that some fabric tells stories in its very texture, that silence can be the loudest form of strength. They look at me with trust, with respect, with the understanding that we all carry things we can't explain, and that's enough. That's everything. To everyone watching this, if someone's quiet about their past, if they won't explain their scars, if they carry themselves with dignity despite mockery, maybe they've earned a silence you'll never understand. Don't mistake quiet for weak. Don't assume that what you can't see doesn't exist. Some battles aren't meant to be explained. Some uniforms tell stories that don't need words. And some warriors fight their hardest fights in the spaces between what they can say and what they must protect. Respect the silence. Honor the spaces you'll never understand. And remember that the most powerful stories are sometimes the ones that never get told. If this story hit you, if you believe in respecting silent warriors and karma that speaks louder than words, smash that subscribe button. Comment below. Have you ever been judged for something people didn't understand? Let's talk about it. And hit that like button if you believe some uniforms carry more honor than any ribbon ever could. Some secrets don't stay buried, and some justice doesn't need you to ask for it. It just comes, like thunder after lightning, inevitable and perfect. Thank you for listening to my story.